This guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
He's a complete freak of nature, maybe one of the biggest freaks that we've seen. Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you this Tuesday. 5 stars flying off the boards. DJ Pickett, got guys like Derrick Meadows off to the Bayou. LSU, big weekend for them. We'll talk more about the Bayou Bengals here in a second. Also, what happens with 5-star Trey McNutt? He had a decision ready to be made on Friday. He'll move that now to August 3rd. We'll preview that and a couple more as well. And Drew, like I said, man, a lot going on in the world of college football recruiting, but we're talking about 2025s. We haven't really talked about 2026, and they deserve to get a little bit of attention because we got a rankings update, top 247 update next Wednesday. If you've been paying attention, a little moving around, not much. We'll shift some names around, but Drew, you and I, the rest of the scouting team at 24/7 Sports going through our audit, and we thought, hey, what a great opportunity to maybe kind of present some names that we haven't talked about. And one of those guys, Drew, that I think yesterday you kind of pinged me on that you're like, hey, have you watched this kid, Rodney Dunham? And sure, yeah, he's a top 32 player in the country. But after seeing him at UA Charlotte a little bit earlier in the spring/summer, there's a lot to like about this kid.
Yeah, Coop, there is. Going through the 2026s, right? These are the sophomores about to start the junior seasons. And what's unique about this group of players, this pool of players, is a lot of them worked out for colleges there in the month of June. And we had the Under Armour Future 50 at IMG Academy. So some movement coming with the 2026 rankings. You said it, Rodney Dunham. He's a guy that we kind of took a calculated shot on when we expanded that top 247. He's sitting in, quote unquote, our top 32. Doesn't hold a 5-star grade right now, but I think he's certainly, out of everyone I've watched so far, he's in the conversation to potentially play his way into that 5th star. You mentioned what he did at the Under Armour camp there in Charlotte. I thought that workout was super impressive. And Coop, what really got me excited is Rodney Dunham turned 16 years old 2 weeks ago. So he's young for the grade, could technically be a 2027 prospect. He's also a good baseball player. Rare to see that with the defensive end pass rusher mixing it up with baseball, but he throws 89 on the mound, spent much of the summer months participating in travel baseball. So I'm big on Rodney Dunham. I'm big on Zion Ely. Those are 2 pass rushers, and everyone keeps asking us, all right, what are the early indicators? What's that hot position group? I think it's the edge group in 2026. I think there's some certified dudes there. Rodney Dunham leading off the bunch.
2026 top 247 update out next week on Wednesday. Make sure to pay attention to that. Guys like Rodney Dunham, Zion Ely, like Andrew mentioned. Certainly a couple names to keep an eye on. Drew, before we even get to the transaction mark, did you notice the new lead-in to the show? I mean, I feel like we're finally official. I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time now, but now we gotta lead in. Like, is it really a show unless you have a lead-in like that?
Yeah, and we got some audio cuts of us in there. You using the term freak. I thought they would have found me for that one. I think I said someone was zigging and zagging on tape, and I'm trying to go through my memory and recall who that was. Maybe it was Eugene Wilson, who's now at Florida, and I think is going to have a big year in the SEC. But no, we've come a long way, Coop, from your wife making a graphic for the Oyster Boys to a show with a legitimate intro. I love it.
We've been digging in. Shout out to the staff here, our producers here at 24/7 Sports, Chris Belcher, Aaron Grisham, Bradley Tarver as well, doing a phenomenal job, guys. We appreciate you as always. All right, let's get into that transaction wire a little bit. Drew, we talked about LSU at the beginning of the show. Over the last week, LSU's been on a heater. They now climb up to number 4 in the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings, and a lot of that has to do with the 2 5-stars that they added. Let's start with DJ Pickett, Drew. This one went a little bit back and forth. We talked about it last week. It was Oregon, it was Miami, it was LSU, the 3 hats on the table. We talked about the teams that needed this recruitment the most. You talked about Miami, I talked about LSU, and really, ultimately, at the end of the day, that necessity for LSU, Corey Raymond, the defensive backs coach there in Baton Rouge, to bring LSU back to what they're capable of and what they've been known as DBU. Drew, they get DJ Pickett in the boat. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? There's been a lot made about that. But just in terms of the way DJ Pickett is kind of put together, he's really what you like to call a black swan. 6'4", 180 pounds, runs 10.62, can do a lot of different things, two-way player. This is a kid that's going to have to put on some weight at the next level. But in terms of like getting LSU back in that conversation of what they can be when it comes to their defensive back room, they have not been close to that standard over the last 2 years under Brian Kelly. Getting Corey Raymond back in the boat, getting guys like DJ Pickett certainly helps with that cause.
Yeah, and I think when you look at LSU's recruiting class up to number 4, they have the number 1 quarterback in the country committed, but I get excited about these defenders, and it starts with DJ Pickett and then some of those pass rushers. I mean, Pickett, I think he's someone where it's going to take a bit of an adjustment period. He hasn't played a ton of quarter there at Zephyr Hills High School. He's done most of his damage and made the biggest impact as a wide receiver, but from a pure athlete standpoint, you mentioned the length, but how about that suddenness, the top end gear? This is a guy that should see the field early, given what LSU has kind of brought in the past few years. You mentioned they got away from it. This used to be a program where it was DBU, and Corey Raymond brings it back with getting this big commitment. I think Cooper also stands out about the DJ Pickett announcement. Like, when is the last time we've had one like this where he put on that LSU hat? I thought he was going to throw it aside and put on an Oregon one. Like, there was some rare excitement, which is rare to see in the name, image, likeness era. But it's a big win for LSU. I mean, they got the commitment, got to get it across the finish line. But there's certainly reason to be excited about what they did there last week.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. He put on the LSU hat, and I kept thinking, all right, it's going to be one of those recruitments. Maybe it's like 3 shirts that he's got to go through or a couple hats that he's got to go through. Looks like, as of right now, DJ Pickett sticking with LSU. Big gift for Corey Raymond, Blake Baker, the rest of the staff there, and certainly Brian Kelly. But LSU wasn't done. A few days later, they go add Derrick Meadows, top 32 player and 5-star out of Las Vegas, and Bishop Gorman. We have talked a lot about him on this show. Drew, the other thing that I want to kind of bring up here, between Derrick Meadows and DJ Pickett, you're talking about 2 of the biggest enigmas in the class in terms of athletic upside. 6'6.5", 200 pounds with Derrick Meadows. You go through the profile. This is a guy that has all the physical tools that you could possibly dream up at the receiver position. You and I have had a lot of trouble really trying to come up with a player comparison because there's not a lot of guys that make sense. I think Mike Ivins is the closest one that we have landed on. But absent DeCorian Moore, who moves on, decommits from LSU, goes to Oregon. You have Teron Francis in the class as well. Cortez Hankton, he's made quite a living. Guys like Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Lad McConkey during his days at Georgia. Drew, this one was interesting on a lot of different levels, but let's start with LSU getting Derrick Meadows in the boat, beating Notre Dame head-to-head, and one that they really felt like they had to have.
Different type of athlete than DeCorian Moore, but I think if you're Bryce Underwood, you got to be excited about the possibility of throwing it to Derrick Meadows. And you mentioned Cortez Hankton. He was on our show a few months ago. What did he talk about? He wants wide receivers that are multi-sport athletes. Derrick Meadows 2 years ago was the Nevada Gatorade Player of the Year for track and field. He's an elite hurdler, someone that hasn't had the on-field production just yet, only 19 catches as a junior, but he's been playing behind a ton of talented upperclassmen that all could make an impact in college football here in 2024. So we keep saying it, right? We want to see Derrick Meadows do it on the field here as a senior. I think there's a good chance he becomes a breakout star in the high school football world. He's got that early season matchup, his team traveling all the way down to South Florida. He's going to be paired up most likely with our number 1 ranked corner in the class of 2026, Justice Fitzpatrick. Minka's brother is going to be lined up across from him. That's a matchup we have circled to see what Derrick Meadows is able to do. But I love the fit for LSU. Again, it's a little bit different than what they've brought in recently, but man, he's a one-of-one talent and another nice addition for the Tigers. Coop, what stands out to me, right? LSU, if you look at our rankings, I was going through this morning, they have 8 players that are in our, quote, day 1, day 2 range, right? So it's rounds 1, 2, and 3. Only 2 of them are from Louisiana of that 8. The rest of them are from around the country. LSU is doing it nationally right now. They're going to all different pockets. They also have 18 commits total. 8 of them are from Louisiana, but they got 3 from Florida, 2 from Texas, 1 from Arkansas, 1 from Indiana, 1 from Michigan, 1 from Mississippi. This seems like the new age type of recruiting, right? Getting the guys in state. The top 2 prospects from Louisiana committed in Harlem Berry, Devin Harper. Outside of that, though, they're going to all these different talent pockets, and they're getting the best of the best heading into these senior seasons.
I think what's interesting, you look at this Derrick Meadows recruitment and really the DJ Pickett recruitment. I talked about Oregon and Miami, but you're talking about two of the biggest programs in terms of investment when it comes to talent acquisition on the NIL side in Oregon and Miami. LSU has been a team under Brian Kelly over the last 2 years that has been pretty much dinged in their local market for not really kind of being as maybe as aggressive in the NIL market. Now you go out, you get a guy like DJ Pickett. I mentioned Oregon and Miami. You have to go through Derrick Meadows. From what I understand, Notre Dame put a very competitive offer on the table. LSU, to be able to go out and get Bryce Underwood, the number one player in the country, add a guy like DJ Pickett on the back end at a premium position, then Derrick Meadows as well. I think it speaks volumes to how far LSU has come on the NIL front in a very short amount of time. The other part of this, I mentioned Notre Dame, Drew. Here's the part that I find interesting on the flip side. Notre Dame did everything right. And we talked about NIL, and we talked about the great equalizer. They did everything right in the recruitment of Derrick Meadows. They got him to camp a year ago when Derrick Meadows only had one Power 4 offer. That was Utah. He goes out, he balls out at camp. They get the early offer. They get him on campus. They do a tremendous job with the recruitment. LSU doesn't offer until February of 2024. Then you have the summer official visits. LSU goes the week after Notre Dame. Notre Dame has done everything right, and this is a position of need where they need to get bigger, and they need to get faster, and they need to get stronger, and they need to get more dynamic. We have talked about Notre Dame's quarterback room ad nauseum, what they have there. Riley Leonard, Kenny Minchie, C.J. Clark, Deuce Knight. There is a lot to work with at that position. At the skill position, it seems like they're having an incredibly difficult time right now, and I don't think we're talking about that. I think a lot of kudos are going to LSU, and rightfully so, but Notre Dame on the other end of this, I thought to myself, what do you do? What can you do if you're Marcus Freeman to kind of, you go back to Dante Moore, to Keon Keeley, to Peyton Bowen. These guys just start to add up a little bit more and more. And you and I talked about this a year ago. You just got to get back in the batter's box and you got to continue to take swings. This is discouraging, though, because ultimately at the end of the day, I believe they had a better offer financially on the table for a guy like Derrick Meadows. They still lose out. So what do you do to course correct, right? Because they are stepping up to the table from an NIL standpoint. I just find this incredibly discouraging for Notre Dame, this one particular recruitment where, quite honestly, they checked every single box and they still weren't able to get it done.
Well, they got to keep chopping wood here. I mean, I don't have the answer as to what they're supposed to do, but you mentioned Keon Keeley, Peyton Bowen, all those other guys, but how about Bryce Young, right? They picked up a commitment from him. I'm talking about the five-star pass rusher in the 2024 cycle. When they landed his pledge, I mean, he was a three-star prospect, finishes in the top 32 for us after an excellent week at the All-American Bowl. I think it comes down to identifying the right individuals. They have to volume shoot. You want to talk about the summer camps and the potential changes coming to the recruiting calendar and that window shrinking. Yeah, it didn't work out with Derrick Meadows, but it worked out in the past because you identified Bryce Young as a Notre Dame type of kid, and you got him committed, you got him signed, sealed, and delivered, and we're going to see him making an impact eventually there in South Bend. So it stings, certainly, but you got to toughen up, and I think you got to keep embracing these type of battles and really honing in on that ID. Again, I think it's the volume play. You got to just keep getting those guys on campus. You look at who they had on in South Bend last month for the Irish invasion. We saw that kind of roster. They do an excellent job, I think, of IDing the young, rising juniors, rising seniors. So to me, I would tell Marcus Freeman, hey, didn't get this one, back at it next go round.
Yeah, keep fighting the good fight if you're Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. Drew, the last thing on Derrick Meadows, and I want to give some context here. Derrick Meadows right now, the number 32 ranked player in the country. That means he's got the last spot as a five-star. Drew, this was one of, I think, the biggest projections that you and I, the rest of the scouting team, has made in terms of giving a player with the lack of production of Derrick Meadows a fifth star. And the reason why we felt so comfortable with that is because we mentioned just kind of the unicorn traits that he has between the size, speed, and athleticism playing at a program like Bishop Gorman. We're really, really betting on him taking that leap from his junior to his senior season, Drew, but we are still waiting for that production to kind of match what we've seen physically. So a little fact or fiction question, and you can kind of answer this whatever way you want, but I thought about it this morning on my drive into work. Like, is Derrick Meadows. If you were a betting man right now, is he going to be a 5-star when this is all said and done in February of 2025 when we're putting out the last top 247 update?
I'm going to say fact. I would amount more confident in that fact. This was back in January before LSU offered, and we saw him dominate that Battle Miami 7-on-7 tournament. He was unreal, right? Not only making contested catches, but he was running away from would-be tacklers, two-hand touchers in the open field, which is pretty hard to do in that setting when you're 6'6", 200 pounds. Didn't get a ton of exposure to him the past few months. I believe he was dealing with some type of injury. So I'm going to say fact, but again, that first 3-4 games from the senior season I think will be so important. And then hopefully we get him in one of these all-star games, the All-American Bowl. But I'm buying into it because he is, a freak athlete.
All right, quick follow-up. Derrick Meadows, DJ Pickett, can we expect both of them on Andrew Ivins' freak list?
I think that's a given, Cooper. Come on.
All right, let's stick in the SEC. And before we do that, real quick, Tom Loy, our friend who joins us every Wednesday, he's in the chat right now. So if you have recruiting questions about some prospects out there and where they're leaning to your favorite program, hopefully Tom Loy is in the chat to answer those questions. Drew, let's talk about another receiver really kind of nipping on the heels of a guy like Derrick Meadows right now, knocking on the door of 5-star status. Vernell Brown, we talked about him on last week's show, the number 36 player in the country, the number 7 receiver. Drew, we kind of got the headwind that he was moving in the direction of Florida and Billy Napier. In Florida right now, Drew ranked number 62 in the country. They are second to last in the SEC at number 15, only ahead of Vanderbilt, right? So a lot of work to be done on the recruiting trail for Billy Napier and company. But Drew, like Vernell Brown, you think of him with a guy like Joshua Moore, what they've done with guys like Trey Wilson as well. I went back, I looked at Trey Wilson just in terms of the metrics coming out going into his senior season. These two are really similar. I think a lot of people will look at that comparison and say, oh, that's kind of easy. It's a little bit of a layup. There is a lot of similarities between these two guys, Drew. The more and more I learn about Vernell Brown, the more I like, not only about the football player, but the person. His dad, Vernell, also played DB at UF from 2001 to 2005. He was a support staff member there from 18 to 23. He's now Anthony Richardson's manager. How about that for a little bit of a side note? But Vernell Brown, man, just huge pickup in Gainesville.
Coop, I mean, yeah, it might be an easy comp, but both of their dads played at a high level. Both of them three-phase impact players, and the first time I saw both of them, they were playing safety. So I think the glove fits in terms of that player comparison. I said it last week. Billy Napier needed this one, and hopefully it starts a run of commitment for the Gators. You said it; they're sitting 62nd right now in the rankings. Coop, this morning I looked it up, and I hope my research is right. But Florida hasn't finished outside of the top 25 in the recruiting rankings since 2001, when they finished 47th. That's when Ron Zook took over for Steve Spurrier. In fact, they haven't finished in that stretch from 2024 to 2001. Just one time have they been in the 20s at the rankings. That was back in 2015. They finished 21st. So this is pacing to be a historically bad finish for the Gators, and they get Vernell Brown on the boat. They got a big recruiting weekend dialed up. Ty Jackson, top 247 linebackers expected to be in town. Nashawn Montgomery, a wide receiver. Zion Grady, Coop, remember that name? Number 1 ranked junior college player right now. He's expected to be in town as well. And, I think the pressure's on for Billy, and I think that's affected this recruiting class in terms of all the noise about his job security. Everyone's well aware they're going to play one of the toughest schedules in the country. Vegas has the over-under for the win total set at 4.5. I think Florida, if they are able to rattle off some wins, that's going to allow them to circle back on some of these kids that visited in June and pull out that spatula and hopefully land some flips.
I've checked in on the status of this current recruiting class around Florida, talked to some guys maybe on the agency side of this and kind of said, all right, why are they lagging so much? And really in the first 2 years of Billy Napier's tenure in Gainesville, you saw a team from a talent identification, from an evaluation standpoint, all rowing in the same direction. That was kind of that has been over the last 2 years. If there's one thing that Billy Napier has done well, It's been putting this roster together that has not showed up on the field yet, but there is a lot of young, redeeming pieces that I think a lot of teams around the country have a ton of interest in. So to see this, where Florida right now in July, going into August, is sitting at number 62, it almost kind of feels like, hey, it's just going to have to play out on the field, and we'll wait and see. And if the results are positive, then we'll dive back in when the water's warm, and we'll be able to capitalize, and maybe we'll be able to catapult ourselves into a top 25 class. But, Drew, it feels very, very different than what it's looked like the last 2 years, and everything makes me believe, reading in between the lines, like this is it for Billy Napier. He's got to win this season, or he's going to be out, and he's going to be out quickly. In this recruiting class right now, there's nothing to it that makes me believe that Billy Napier is not just focused on the only task at hand, which is winning football games, find a way to survive, and then the recruiting can kind of come after that. Because right now, this is a very different field than what we've seen the last 2 years.
And I was talking with Blake Alderman of Swamp 247 kind of before Vernell Brown announced for the Gators. And I think where you kind of have to give some credit to Florida is, yeah, they're sitting 62nd in the rankings, but you look at that commit list and there's no one on there where you're like, okay, why are you reaching for this individual? I've always thought Billy Napier and his staff, the back end of the recruiting class, there's so much developmental upside. And you're right. You look at Florida's two deep heading into this season, it is full of talent and guys that have exceeded and outplayed their rankings. So to me, the fact that they haven't just gone out there and chased some prospects that might be ranked high and, that they don't believe in and just filled out that recruiting class says a lot. And again, Coop, let's say they exceed expectations. These are some of the guys I've kind of written down as potential flip targets for them. Malik Autry, the five-star defensive lineman committed to Auburn. He took an official visit there. Solomon Thomas, the five-star offensive lineman committed to Florida from Jacksonville. Florida's had a ton of success in recent years in Duval County. You got Hilton Stubbs out there, Tavion Wallace, Donovan Olabode. So they've got a lot of these guys on campus, but I think everyone wants to see what the season is going to look like.
Going to be a really interesting storyline to follow. Week 1 against Miami, we talked about that on this show. Billy Napier, Florida Gators have their hands full in a year where they got to get it right. Drew, let's keep it moving here. Staying in the SEC, 3-star defensive lineman Floyd Boucard, he jumps in the boat. Now at Miami Central, was in Mobile Christian last year in Alabama, had 11 sacks, number 44 defensive lineman in the country. So Oklahoma now up to the number 8 recruiting class in the country per 24/7 Sports. They're looking for their 4th straight cycle, that initial cycle when Brent Venables came in from Clemson to finish in the top 10. Floyd Boucard, really, really interesting player, Drew, when you look at him. 6'3", hovered around 300 pounds, got 33-inch arms, hockey background, born in Canada, a guy that is, the more you watch, really versatile. He talked about his versatile skill set and why he thought Oklahoma, Brent Venables kind of gave him the best chance to be successful when he committed there. Versatility was the key. Drew, I haven't seen a guy like this, at least in an individual workout when he worked out earlier this offseason, move as well as he does for his size. I mentioned he's got that compact frame. I don't know how much room there is to grow, but he moves like somebody that's at the mid-skill position, like he's a running back or he's a linebacker. The efficiency, the power, the twitch that he plays with, he is a really, really fun kid. And this is a really, really kind of like savvy evaluation. You and I have talked on this show. Defensive linemen, there's a little bit of a game going on, game within the game. You want to get these guys in the boat early, not only for the financial discount reason, but these are the guys ultimately at the end of the day that you're going to have to develop. I see the vision here for a guy like Floyd Boucard in Norman.
Absolutely, and I think he needed to find a home where they run a four-man front up, on defense. So I think he's the perfect fit. Guy that wins with secondary effort, motor runs hot, whatever cliche you want to throw out there. Headed to Miami Central, like you said, and they've turned out some notable pass rushers. Ruben Bain comes to mind out of Miami Central now, what he's been able to do with the Hurricanes. No, this is a fit for Oklahoma. I thought what you wrote is interesting when we talk about the Sooners class. They have no guys in our quote-unquote top 64, so that'd be round 1, round 2, and they're pretty full. I think they're sitting at 22 commits right now. It's just a different path to how they've gotten to number 8 in the rankings. With that being said, there are some pieces I really like. Tristan Haynes, the cornerback, we're going to see him in the All-American Bowl there out of Oklahoma. Love the combination of his size and his speed, what he's able to do out on the perimeter. Ryan Foji, the offensive tackle, offensive guard guy, I think they can play multiple spots up front. Another one that's going to be in the All-American Bowl. And then I see the vision with some of those receivers, Marcus Harris, Cortez Mills. Just an interesting route to getting to that number 8, just given that there hasn't been really a blue chip headliner like previous classes.
All right, let's go to Miami. We always have Miami fans in the chat, guys. We appreciate you watching the show. As always, Jabari Antoine, it was a good weekend for LSU. It could have been a better weekend for LSU. Jabari Antoine, top 247 DB, top 150 player, number 18 cornerback. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? That is yet to be decided. He commits to Miami. The Canes' defensive backfield now. Hilton Stubbs, Amari Wallace, Chris Ewald, Timothy Merritt from Alabama as well, another up-and-coming developmental upside type of DB. Jabari Antoine, Drew, big body, a lot of length. And if you look at the secondary, guys that can do a lot of different things. You got guys that can play on the perimeter. You got guys that can play closer to the line of scrimmage, and guys like Amari Wallace. And then you got guys that a little bit more on the wait-and-see mode like Timothy Merritt. Nonetheless, a lot of intriguing parts here for Mario Cristobal to work with in their defensive backfield.
Right, and Jabari is a guy that injured his collarbone last season, right? So he only played in a handful of games. But when I look at this defensive back group, I think it fits what the Hurricanes want to do there. Chevis Jackson, the new corners coach, he comes in. Guys with, you said it, traits, that length to play on the outside. You got Chris Ewald from there in South Florida. I think he's a very competitive corner. Then the two safeties, Hilton Stubbs, Amari Wallace. I mean, these guys are very physical, hit you in the mouth type of defenders. So to me, when you look at this group for Miami, it feels like, okay, you could look up 3-4 years down the line, and this is kind of your starting 4 or 5 in the secondary. I think versatility is key. They're still in play for Ben Hanks, one of the top uncommitted corners right now. But Coop, I mean, you got to credit Miami for realizing it wasn't kind of a top-heavy year for defensive backs in the Tri-County area, which is normally their bread and butter. And now they've gone into different pockets of the country. Merritt from Alabama, Jabari is from Louisiana. That's smart recruiting in my eyes.
Miami now ranked number 9 in the 24/7 Sports Composite Team rankings. If you're looking for a team to make a move at some point, whether it's inching up closer to that top 5, keep an eye on Mario Cristobal in Miami. Guys, just a reminder, you are locked in to the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast with Andrew Ivins and Cooper Petagna. You can find us every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Eastern Time on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Please make sure to like and subscribe. That helps us out very much, guys. We appreciate you watching. As Drew, we continue to go through a very loaded transaction wire. And one of those teams, Drew, that we had talked about just getting better and better on their defensive front. How about Clemson, right? They have to build it through the high school channels, if you want to say. Obviously, the transfer portal, not much of an option under Dabo Swinney. They add Bryce Davis, the number 64 player in the country out of the state of North Carolina, the number 9 defensive lineman. The top 6 players in Clemson's class, Drew, are all on the defensive side of the football. That's a conversation for another time, but we're starting to see a little bit of separation there from the two sides of the football. You got guys like Amari Adams, Isaiah Campbell, Aria Watford, Bryce Davis, Grayson Littleton, Tay Harris. Clemson getting it done, but especially that defensive line. I mean, we saw guys like Peter Woods. You saw guys like Tamarian Parker, Vic Burley, who we're still waiting to see more of. Nick Eason getting it done on the defensive line. If you want to look at the strongest part of Clemson's team from a roster building standpoint, it's that defensive front. And Drew, Bryce Davis is a guy that he's super intriguing because he didn't play all that much last year. He had a lower extremity injury. You can play him off the edge. You can play him with your hand in the ground. He can do a lot of different things. Quick twitch, explosive. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Peter Woods. I don't want to put him in that same category, but just in terms of skill set build, he is a position versatile kid that can give you a lot of value in terms of what he can do from a position flex standpoint and a skill set standpoint as well. I love this pickup. We got him there in the round 2 range, but this is a guy I can't wait to see as a senior.
You mentioned Peter Woods. I said it, I think, on last week's show. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Ruben Bain in the sense where you're trying to project him long term, right? So is he an interior guy? Is he an edge player? I don't think it really matters with Bryce Davis. He's someone that can get to the quarterback. And you mentioned he didn't play a bunch as a junior due to injury, but man, that Future 50 workout 2 summers ago there at IMG Academy, he was in the Final Five. He's one of the few pass rushers that gave a really talented offensive tackle group issues. I think for Clemson, this is a sneaky good pickup in the sense that, okay, maybe the SEC wasn't involved. I think it came down to Duke, South Carolina was in there, but I think he fits that program to a T. And I think we could look up a few years from now and you're like, oh, yeah, there's Bryce Davis getting a sack for them. So I think it was a one of those ones they had to get from that June visitor weekend, and certainly a reason to be excited about the future of that front seven.
Clemson knocking on the door of top 10 status, ranked number 11 right now, according to 24/7 Sports in the team rankings. A team that they will face in week 1 is Georgia. That's going to be an interesting matchup. But Georgia not taking their foot off the gas pedal when it comes to recruiting either. Cortez Smith drew a top 247 interior offensive lineman, top 10 ranked at his position. You talk about an interesting kid. The Bulldogs add him to the fold. He joins 4-star Mason Short on the interior offensive line. Also, 3-star Dontrell Glover as well. Drew, how about this? 6'2", 3/4, 310 pounds. That's the average of this group compared to the wall that they brought in last year, do you even remember what the average height weight was of that group? But maybe 3.5 inches, maybe 20, 30 pounds between what we've seen on the average side. No tackle in that group yet. But nonetheless, Cortez Smith, a guy that can play guard, play center as well. Easy to see what Kirby Smart likes here.
Well, the Great Wall of Athens, I think it was 6'5", 340. Jazier Jackson, who was the late addition, the former semi-pro basketball player, I think he kind of pushed those numbers up a little bit because he was 6'10", 350 pounds. But Cortez Smith, I think Georgia might have of the future. Talked with some people there in Athens. They also like Dontrell Glover potentially snapping the football. I'm a fan of Cortez. Listed at 310 there. I think he's closer to 330. One of the youngest players we have come across in the 2025 cycle. He can move. He can seal off run lanes. I mean, this is a Kirby Smart Georgia specialist. Stacy Searles, the offensive line coach there. He's a guy that can play on the inside with those big towers surrounding him at the guards and tackle spots.
Georgia continuing to do what they do on the recruiting trail. Drew, a team that we have not talked a lot about, at least recently, about Tennessee. Tennessee is one of those teams, I think, every time you and I kind of wake up and we look at the rankings and we look at Tennessee, and they're kind of knocking on the door of maybe a top 10 program, but they're really kind of in that 11 to 15 range. That's where they are right now. But Tennessee, they pick up Christian Gass, a 3-star linebacker from the state of Georgia. The Vols now ranked number 10 in the team rankings. You have 7 prospects inside the top 247. Drew, one of those teams that if you could have a top 10 class and you could still call them sneaky, I think Tennessee kind of fits the bill there. George McIntyre, Douglas Utu, Marion Dye, Ethan Utley, Travis Smith Jr., Jaden Lofton, Nick Moore. You look at that group and it looks like pound for pound. I like every single one of those guys. Now you add in Gass, a guy 6'2.5", 210 pounds. He's long arms, long wingspan, a lot of room to grow, and a guy that ran 11.3 this spring as well. So traits there to work with. Tennessee, I feel like the last 2 years, everybody wants to talk about offense, and rightfully so, under an offensive-minded coach in Josh Heupel. It's really what they've done defensively, Drew, is where I think they're going to start to close the gap.
Yeah, and I've felt that way the past few cycles. Christian Gass, only 11 tackles for loss, 2 sacks as a junior, really someone we want to see as a senior, because I think there is a little more to the athlete here. You mentioned the long arms and the 11.3. How about a 4.48 in the short shuttle, a 31-inch vertical jump, and a 9.3 in the broad jump? I don't think that matches up on tape just yet. You know, he's more of a C-ball, hit ball type of defender. Instincts need to improve, but I love the athlete. I think there's some growth potential with that frame. So a really good pickup for Tennessee, and you pair him with Marion Dye, you pair him with Jaden Lofton. Tennessee, to me, in my eyes, they continue to just bring in individuals that can be part of a two deep there in the SEC. We know they're going to score points with Josh Heupel there and all the offensive talent and the quarterbacks, and they're going to light up scoreboards, but they need to stop opponents. Christian Gass is yet another defender that you think in theory should allow you to do just that.
A lot of SEC flavor this week on the Transaction Wire. We got more commitments that we'll preview here soon enough. Just a reminder, Tom Loy is in the chat answering your questions. So if you have some questions about the latest recruiting intel, make sure to get those into Tom Loy on the chat. Drew, it wasn't all just commitments. We had some drama as well as five-star safety. Trey McNutt, the number one safety in the country, pushed back his commitment date. It was supposed to be this past Friday. It will now be August 3rd. On Wednesday, Oregon, Texas A&M, Ohio State, Florida, the teams with the hats on the table for Trey McNutt. Also USC mentioned in there as well. Drew, as of right now, 100% of the crystal ball on the Oregon Ducks from what I understand. There's no reason to think that it won't be Oregon when Trey McNutt finally decides. Obviously, teams like Texas A&M, Ohio State, now going to have a little bit more time to make their pitch, but it seems like Trey McNutt could be heading out west. We'll see what happens in a couple of weeks. What would that mean if that does happen for Oregon, Dan Lanning, to get the number one safety in the boat?
Well, it gives them a high IQ defender right there in the secondary. Man, I think they got two really good corners committed already. This is a guy that can play the center field. This is a guy that can get individuals aligned, and more importantly, he's a guy that can generate turnovers. Cooper, I think you kind of called this when the DJ Pickett, when we came on the show last week talking about everyone thought DJ Pickett was going to be an Oregon Duck. You said what would happen if you were to pick another school? Would that thing change things with Trey McNutt? It seems like it did, right? That has to be the reason why he pushed things back.
Yeah, talking to Tom this morning, it seemed like Trey McNutt just had some logistical things. He was going to make his announcement, couldn't get his family there for the announcement. Some other things came up as well. We'll see what happens. Still some time for some things to play out. You never know in this era of college football recruiting, especially with the NIL component, when you're dealing with a caliber of player like Trey McNutt. So we'll see what happens with him as well. Drew, a couple upcoming commitments that we just want to touch on real quick. How about Malik Clark, a guy that we have in the top 247, a really, really interesting receiver, top 25 receiver in the country. He'll make his announcement on July 25th. He's from Rock Hill, South Carolina. It seems like the Gamecocks have momentum here. Got to see him in May at Charlotte at UA Next Camp. You talk about like an intriguing dude just kind of hanging out on the back end of the top 247, and we'll see. I mean, 6'2.5", runs really well. Super intriguing kid, can take the top off the defense. The production, not there yet. But if you want to look at a fun guy to scout as a senior, Drew, and I think one of those guys we'll probably have in that priority watch bucket that could potentially move up the board, it would be a guy like Malik Clark.
Yeah, he's a perimeter playmaker with the speed to find the end zone. I think he went 10.55 in the 100-meter dash here as a junior, but he also tested off the charts. I think he's had the fastest 40-yard dash on the Under Armour Next Camp circuit, 4.39 on the lasers. Also went 4.3 in the short shuttle with a 122-inch broad jump. So the athletic juice is there. You go back to that workout in Charlotte, okay, and then you look at his senior tape. I don't think he's the most polished wide receiver at this stage. I mean, he can break off defensive backs. I think he's got to get a little bit more efficient with the footwork, got to get better in contested catch situations. But when it comes to guys in this cycle with his size, long limbs, you said it, over 6'2", he's one of the best at attacking the second and third levels. You mentioned South Carolina, sneaky good wide receiver class for them. They've added Lex Cyrus, a few different individuals here recently. To me, Malik would kind of be the cherry on top for them, and he would give them some much needed size in that wide receiver room. So we'll see what happens, but kind of a late bloomer that I think we're falling more and more in love with as we learn more about him.
Feels like Shane Beamer, South Carolina. They need a win right now. You got a new director of player personnel in there, Darren Usher, coming over from Oregon, spent some time with Brian Harsin at Auburn. Taylor Edwards out. We'll see if South Carolina can get it going. They obviously need a win this year. We'll see what happens with South Carolina recruiting. Another guy, Drew, that I don't want to say is like the forgotten man, but we just haven't talked about this guy a lot. How about top 247 safety. I had to look down because I didn't know if he was an athlete or not. Lonza Hayward. There's a lot to like about this kid. Three-phase player, 6'1", almost 200 pounds. Does a lot of different things. I think we are very comfortable saying you kind of put that football player label on a guy like Lonza Hayward. Just put him out there, and this is going to be a guy that's going to add value to your team. A lot to like about this kid. We talked about Tennessee earlier in the show, and ironically, Tennessee being a team that's doing some things defensively that maybe not a lot of people are paying attention to. It seems like the Vols are in a good spot here. Lonza Hayward is a guy that I think you and I, the rest of our staff here on the scouting side, really, really like.
Yeah, I love him. He entered the top 247 back in November, and I think his quote-unquote best offer was from the Charlotte 49ers. He has come a long way, obviously. Coop, this is what I wrote in my initial kind of watch of him last fall. Do not really know what this kid is going to be. Box safety, off-ball linebacker, but I like him. Brings nothing but physicality to the game. You're seeing it here with the clips. He seems to have a monster frame and is like someone that could eventually carry 225 pounds. Now, I think the number we have on him, the most recent one, pushing 200 pounds, but gets offensive snaps, does it in the return game. I think he's a potential special teams ace. And you said it, Tennessee, the Volunteers. We just talked about Marion Dye. We just talked about Jaden Lofton, Ethan Utley, another big body there in the front. Man, if they can add Lonza to the mix, he is someone that offers so much versatility because he can get home on the blitz and he can also cover. A guy we pushed up the board after seeing him at the Under Armour Atlanta camp. I think he's personally, kind of as a group, one of our favorite defenders at that second level in the entire class.
Tennessee, keep an eye on the Vols here down the stretch. And for everything that you need to know for college football recruiting, make sure to keep it locked to 247sports.com. Wall-to-wall team coverage, also recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates as well. We'll have that 2026 Top 247 update next Wednesday. So everything you need to know right here at 247sports.com. And Drew, without further ado, it's time for some questions. I know Tom Loy is getting worn out in the chat. We appreciate that. Guys, if you have scouting questions, make sure to get those in right now. The boys would love to answer your questions. And Drew, how about this question from Barry Bonds Forehead? Love that. Any team outside the top 30 who could make a big Michigan-esque jump in the rankings? And that's a good question from Barry Bonds Forehead because Michigan was one of those teams, Drew, that I think you and I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. Now all of a sudden they're in the top 15. You got 5 stars out there like Andrew Babaloa, Jerome Miles as well, that Michigan is well within striking distance of. So Michigan could make a move, but it brings up the point. Who are teams outside the top 30 currently in the recruiting rankings that could move into that top 25 category? Drew, is there one more than the rest that stands out to you?
Well, I wrote down 3 teams. One of them I already talked about. That's Florida, because they have never finished this low. They haven't finished outside of the top 20 in 20 years. So they're one I would have my eye on. And who knows what happens with Billy Napier, but if they bring someone in, you think there would be some alignment, some support. Maybe they could pull off some flips there in December or January. So Florida's my first one. The second one, Cooper, is Ole Miss, sitting at number 49 right now, 12 commits. Now, they've had some defections from that recruiting class. You just mentioned Jerome Miles. They've also lost Alkline Deer, Dylan Alfred, quarterback, right? And they've been linked to Deuce Knight, who is in 5-star striking distance for us. You get Deuce Knight in the boat. That would certainly shoot them up the rankings. But the other thing to me is a lot of people have linked Ole Miss to a potential college football playoff run. Over-under for the win total for them sitting at 9.5. What if they have a magical season? Does that allow them to get more aggressive on the recruiting trail? Are we going to see Lane Kiffin with the Flipmas sweater going out there and getting a bunch of guys? So Ole Miss is the one to me that really I kind of circled. Big recruiting weekend coming up. They got Juice Fest. I think that's named after Lane Kiffin's dog. Love that. But they're one I got my eye on. 4 commits right now hold 4-star status on 24/7 Sports. None of them in the top 247. So they're really kind of searching for that first headliner in the group.
All right, how about this one? How about Nebraska? They're sitting there at number 30, all right? So it's a little bit of a layup right now. Nebraska right now, they're in it for David Sanders. We'll see, but it seems like they're kind of hanging around there. Nebraska is one of those teams. You look at the first 5 weeks of the season, they could easily navigate. I don't want to say easily, but it's a schedule for a freshman quarterback as highly touted as Dylan Raiola is. You look at Nebraska going into year 2 under Matt Rule. Drew, if they get through that stretch, they get into Big Ten play unscathed, Nebraska is one of those teams that I think can ride that high of momentum and really kind of show up on the recruiting trail, and now you'll see a team kind of work their way into the top 20. So I think Nebraska's got some meat left on the bone. You look at Utah as well. Kyle Whittingham, interesting situation. Morgan Scalley, the head coach in waiting. Utah's always been just a finishing team. They seem to get stronger and stronger because people look at Utah now in the Big 12, one of those teams you look up, 9-10 wins every season playing in a New Year's Six Bowl. They're able to keep guys home. They do a great job in the Mountain West footprint. Utah's a team. Indiana, Drew, how about this one? All right, it seems like Auburn has moved on from Julian Lewis. We'll see what happens if USC is going to be the landing spot. Outside of that, what happens if Indiana is able to pull a guy like Julian Lewis? What does that mean for that program? And we talked about it. Crazier things have happened. We're in the NIL era. Maybe this is just the best fit in terms of access to playing time, comfort in the relationship, and financial incentive as well for Julian Lewis in his family. So if Indiana was able to pull that off, Curt Cignetti goes into his first year able to pull off a couple wins that maybe people don't expect. Indiana's one of those teams that I would keep an eye out. And the other thing about Indiana, I love what they're doing from a talent ID evaluation standpoint as well. Mike Ferrara comes over from LSU, the young director of player personnel. I think he's got a great eye for talent. Curt Cignetti's done some things that I've kind of have kind of made me raise my eyebrows a little bit year one there at IU. So IU, I look as a team that's got a pathway to a potential top 30, to a potential top 25 class. Drew, I don't know what you think about that, but Indiana right now is one of those teams I'm kind of watching that I'm like, this is kind of a low-key team here in the Big Ten that, under Curt Cignetti has a chance to kind of build a new identity.
Yeah, I've actually heard from some college staffers, not at IU, but other P4 staffers, that they thought Indiana was super aggressive this cycle, unlike previous years when they've kind of gone head-to-head. I mean, getting guys on campus, not essentially squeezing them, but, hey, you're going to visit. We want to know if you're going to be in or you're out. So certainly I like that one. The other two I had written down, Cooper, I don't even know where Colorado's ranked. I mean, who knows what Coach Prime's going to do after this season, but they're also involved to some degree with Julian Lewis. And Prime is always good for some surprises come signing day. So, they're one that could potentially climb up the board. I mean, think about it. They had a magical season there with Travis Hunter, Shadur. Do more prospects want to get in? And let's also not forget, it's not like Colorado did a ton of summer visits, so they got plenty to burn during the fall months. The other one, Arkansas, and it's low-hanging fruit because they're sitting at number 31 right now. But this, to me, is more of what happens with Sam Pittman. Rhett Lashley at SMU. I said it. I think someone else wrote it at 24/7 Sports. Brad Crawford, kind of in his ACC predictions, bold predictions for the upcoming season. He says, what if Rhett Lashley has a magical year? He's going to be one of the hottest coaching names. Rhett Lashley has ties to Arkansas. I'm not calling for a coaching change, but if Sam Pittman were to leave, I think Rhett Lashley would certainly make sense as a potential candidate there for the Razorbacks. He's got SMU in position to sign their best recruiting class ever. They're sitting 20th right now in the rankings. You think if he were to take over in Arkansas, he could get some things going on the recruiting front, go after Carius Curran, the state's top-ranked prospect who is committed right now to LSU. They also got Tavian Wallace in the fold. So, that's another one. I think Sam Pittman could get them into the top 25 certainly as well. But that's where my mind also went as well, with this whole question is like, all right, where could some coaching changes come at some point down the line?
I don't know if I would want to leave if I was Rhett Lashley, just kind of like reading in on that situation, the ACC, SMU, just in terms of the financial backing there as well. You've seen what they've been able to do in the recruiting trail. Imagine that with some wins in a Power 4 conference as well. So we'll see what happens. Huge year for Sam Pittman as well. Tom Loy in the chat just said, don't sleep on Nebraska for David Sanders, the number one tackle in the country. We'll see what happens there. Drew, some other questions we'll get to from Kanan Torres. He says, who are three of y'all's underrated strength and conditioning coaches in college football this coming season. We root for Tommy Moffitt here. Tommy Moffitt, now the head strength and conditioning coach over at Texas A&M, spent most of his time at LSU under Les Miles, Ed Orgeron, and one of the better ones in the business. Drew, I'm not as, I would say, familiar, I guess, in the strength and conditioning scene, maybe as we are on the player personnel side. So I'm going to let you take the tee box here. Are there any names, maybe some names you've kind of heard behind the scenes of like, hey, you know what, this guy does a really good job with this program, a name to know?
Well, let's give Tommy Moffitt some love. 21 years at LSU, 3 national titles, one under Nick Saban, one under Les Miles, and then one under Ed Orgeron. He's going to work for Mike Elko there, right? He was in private business sector, and then Mike Elko tabs him to take over there at Texas A&M. 2019 Football Scoop Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year. We've talked about it every time we mention the Aggies on this show, on this podcast. We think their identity is changing, and I think Tommy Moffitt is a big reason why. So have to give him a shout out. Coop, I'm not super versed, right? I am going to name some guys that I'm somewhat familiar with. First one for me, Kurt Hester at Houston. I don't know if you know much about this guy. Spent a lot of time, 9 years at Louisiana Tech. I tried to add it up when he was at La Tech. I think they had 12 guys drafted in that 9-year stretch, which is certainly impressive. But he went to Tulane 2 years ago. Tulane was coming off a 2-10 season, hired by Willie Fritz. The Green Wave proceeded to go 23-4. That was highlighted by the Cotton Bowl win over USC. Tulane has had 4 guys drafted here over the past 2 years. Kurt Hester, he is now at Houston with Willie Fritz. I think he is certainly a name to know, and I've heard that from some people in the industry. So there's one. David Feely at Duke. I know there's going to be some reaction to that, but he was the 2023 Football Scoop coach, strength and conditioning coach of the year. Apparently, from what I read, Mike Elko was trying to bring him to Texas A&M. He made a promise to his family that he was going to stay there in Durham. Now he's the strength coach for Manny Diaz, who he previously worked with at the University of Miami. I've actually spent some time around him. He's really into the entire kind of Olympic weightlifting thing. But if you go and you read that Football Scoop story about why David Feely won the award, talks a lot about the Blue Devils and their effort and their energy in the second half. So he's one. And then finally, I'm going to give a shout out to Lou Carla at Charlotte. I think he's one of the best motivators out there. I actually am reading one of his books. It's called Firelighters 365. I would recommend it to everyone. It's kind of a daily passage just on motivating. And he is someone that spent time at Georgia Tech. I think he was at Michigan for a little bit. He's all over social media, just different perspectives. And again, I think he gets guys to rally around him. I know he's at the G5 level there at Charlotte, but someone that I kind of admire and look to, because I think what he says makes a lot of sense, not only on the football field, but just in life. So those are the 3 I got.
Drew, give yourself some credit there. That was pretty well read, and it dialed on the strength conditioning side of it. I'm not shocked by that at all. I'll give a little bit of some love out to my boy Wilson Love up there in Eugene, Oregon. Used to work for the FAU Owls. A little bit of a psycho, a little bit of a nut, but he's my favorite. That's my boy. I went to his wedding. He's the man. He's doing a tremendous job for Dan Lanning out there as well. So there you have it, some names in the strength and conditioning field that are names to know. I'm glad you brought up our friend from Charlotte as well, because he is. I think every time I kind of get on social media, does a tremendous job just in terms of somebody that's forward-facing and a guy that's always got a positive message. Drew, we'll end on this one. I think this is a great question, and it's from our own Tom Loy. I'm going to give you a second to prepare because I don't know if you've seen it yet, but Tom asked, is there a player somewhere ranked between number 100 and number 150 that you could see earning a 5th star or getting into that conversation at some point in the evaluation process? I know for me, I just got to double check the ranking. I look at 2 guys for me that kind of stand out. How about Javion Campbell, committed to Kentucky? And this is a guy from the state of Kentucky, that it was Alabama, it was Kentucky. UK got back in there. They got it done. The reason I say this, 6'4", 270. He's ranked at number 109 right now. He's got 34.25-inch arms. He's got an 82 3/4 wingspan. Both of those would be in the 70 or 90th percentile of his position group at the defensive tackle or defensive end position in the NFL today. This guy has only played 1 year of football, and he had 14 sacks. Basketball background, you talk about a big functional athlete, better than functional athlete, I think elite level athlete. The more we learn about him, the more that we like. He's got everything that you want from a physical spec standpoint, and Drew, on tape, he's only going to get better and better. So a senior season where he explodes on the scene, I think this is going to be a guy that we're going to really kind of talk ourselves in more and more to. The other guy just behind him, about Marion Dye, committed to Tennessee. We got him at number 110. But you talk about just a freak of nature from a just pure trait standpoint. 6'4", 3/4, 268, 35.5-inch arms, 7'1" wingspan. Everybody's like, all right, what's up with the length? But in terms of what this guy can do, you can play him in a 2-point, you can play him in a 3-point, and just his ability off the edge, the quick twitch, the explosiveness, the burst to close in the range that he plays with. He's an efficient, proactive mover. What I mean by that, he plays with very little wasted motion. He always has a game plan off the edge. I love Marion Dye. You think about what Tennessee has done at that edge position over the last couple years. You got guys like James Pierce. You got Jordan Ross, one of the best edge rushers in the country last year. You got Marion Dye. I'm forgetting another name in there as well. They've done a great job kind of backloading that position where they have some of the best talent in the country, pound for pound. So Tennessee, in terms of pass rushers, that's a place to look. Those two, Drew, for me, I think stick out right away when I'm kind of going into rounds 4 or round 5. Who are some guys that can maybe move their way into that down or day 2, maybe late day 1 consideration?
Well, those are two I would have certainly highlighted. It's 105 to 150, right? That was the initial question.
100 to 150.
All right, I'm going to give you 3. I mentioned this guy a little bit earlier on the show, Tristan Haynes, the corner out of Carl Albert there in Oklahoma, committed to the Sooners. Coop, he's got the fastest 400-meter dash time out of any of the football players in the 2025 cycle. 97 speed score there on our next-gen software, one of the fastest I've come across in the class. Two-way playmaker. Some schools are recruiting as a wide receiver. Others wanted him on defense like the Sooners do. I'm a big fan of him. Can't wait to see him in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl. I think he can obviously roll, but he can cover as well. And he's got ball skills. I think that's so important for that corner position kind of in this passing area. So he is one. Another, James Flanagan, Notre Dame tight end commit. You want to talk about guys that are going to be on the freaks list, elite throwing metrics when it comes to the shot and the discus, 99 explosion score, one of the only ones we have in this cycle. Also plays hockey, dad, grandfather, both played at the next level. I'm a big fan of him. I think I've kind of been championing his recruitment behind the scenes, but that tight end position, you want to see guys that do a lot of different things. James Flanagan is just that. He is not a one-trick pony. He is a multifaceted athlete in every single sense. And then the third one, Coop, a riser for us in the most recent update, that'd be Michael Carroll, the Alabama commit. He was up in Pennsylvania. He has transferred into IMG Academy for his senior season. I was talking with Brett Greenberg on our Alabama site a few days ago just about the Crimson Tide's class. And it used to be the rule of thumb, right? When Nick Saban had it humming there, the Crimson Tide would get the top offensive lineman every single year out of IMG Academy, right? It was Evan Neal. It was Tyler Booker. Then Miami pulls out Francis Mauanoa. But you look up right now, Michael Carroll is now at IMG Academy. He's going to be the top dude there. Don Zalotti, who does kind of the roster management there at IMG Academy, he actually called me yesterday. He's like, Andrew, you got to come out to this media day, this practice here. in a few weeks. You got to check out all these new guys. I got Michael Carroll was one of the names he highlighted. So excited to get some eyes on him. We love him on tape. He's a road grader, wrestling background. Dad played at Penn State, huge measurables, 6'6", 314 pounds. I think that's another one to certainly know in that 100 to 150 range.
I actually think that Michael Carroll is going to end up sticking at tackle. I know we have the IOL tag on him, but he's long enough. He plays tackle. He's got the two-way snaps, plays defense as well. One of the better athletes I think we've seen at the point of attack. Alabama, in terms of what they have done on the offensive line, Chris Kapelovich, the number one ranked recruiter per 24/7 Sports right now, position recruiter for Alabama in their offensive line. So a lot to be happy about if you're a Tide fan. Drew, that about does it for us. Any final thoughts today before we get cranking for that Wednesday show and the rest of a busy week here?
I think a lot of people are already starting preparations for the upcoming college football season, right? Everyone's playing EA Sports 2025. We got fall camps about to kick off, and we're wrapping up the media days. But it is kind of I think it's one of the low-key best weekends on the recruiting calendar, right? You got some schools that'll get those 2025 targets on campus, but this upcoming weekend with the dead period lifted for 1 week, I think it's really about that next cycle, right? The class of 2026. So to me, what I love to do is see, all right, who's visiting where, some of these high profile guys, which school are they going to pick to visit? Because everyone's having an event, right? So I think you can learn a lot about where these kids show up, because then they start their season, and the next time you're going to see them is on campus for a big game, and they're not going to have a chance to spend time with the coaching staff. Really, those game day visits, you show up, you eat food, you stand on the sidelines, you hang out in the locker room. If the team loses, it's probably not all that fun. But I think it's a low-key, very, very important weekend, just in the sense of it's easy to identify who these schools' top targets are.
Never stops going. I mean, 2025, we talk a lot about on this show. That is the class right now that the majority of you guys are focused on. But the 2026 is right around the corner as they approach their junior season. And like I said earlier in the show, we have a top 247 update for the 2026 class next Wednesday. Make sure to keep it locked to 24/7 Sports. For Andrew Ivins, Tom Loy in the chat, our producer Chris Belcher, and Aaron Grisham, I'm Cooper Petagna. Guys, we appreciate you stopping by. We'll see you same time tomorrow.